Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving into an absolutely fascinating, deeply philosophical piece of lore. We're unpacking Chapter 164, The Bearer of Wrath. Specifically, we're going to look at the fourth shadow, known in the archives as the Crimson Tempest, and explore exactly how it manages to weaponize a completely normal, everyday human emotion, the desire for fairness. It is a wild ride, so let's unravel this architecture of righteous anger together.
Okay, let's dive into this. What actually happens when justice is distorted into absolute destruction? Because that is the core thesis of Chapter 164. We aren't dealing with some simple mustache-twirling evil here. No, we are exploring a scenario where that little, totally natural internal spark of unfairness we all feel is manipulated, twisted, and weaponized until it quite literally strips away our free will entirely.
Chapter 1: The Spark in the Ash and the Sensory Shift.
The text sets an incredibly heavy atmospheric scene for us, out in the highly volatile frontier known as the Iron Marches. Inside the obsidian spire, the air feels thick, tinged with the metallic scent of ozone and old blood. To really understand this new threat, we have to contrast it with the older shadows, like pride and greed. Those forces, they are slow, seductive, and creeping. But the fourth shadow, the Crimson Tempest, does not creep. It arrives like a dry thunderbolt. It transforms a tiny, insignificant grievance into a 5-alarm fire before you even realize you've been burned.
Now, let's look at the geopolitical powder keg that this shadow exploits. We have two twin city-states, Skell, led by Commander Kalen, and Valen, led by the Archon. For generations, these two have been locked in this endless blood feud over a dry gorge known as the Valley of Red Stones. And their core motivation isn't inherently evil, right? It's rooted entirely in historical grievance and this paralyzing fear of unprovoked betrayal. It is the ultimate I have to hit them before they hit me scenario, which, as you'll see, is absolutely perfect kindling for what comes next.
Moving on to Chapter 2, The Anatomy of Illusionary Vengeance.
So, with the stage set, how exactly does this shadow operate on the human mind? The text explicitly defines the Crimson Tempest not as some giant physical beast marching across the plains, but as a psychological manifestation. The absolute genius of this entity is that it doesn't rely on pure malice. Instead, it takes a genuine, entirely valid feeling of unfairness and acts as a massive accelerant, blowing that tiny spark up into a raging inferno.
And the architecture of that psychological manipulation is terrifyingly precise. It strips free will through 4 distinct steps. First, it intensifies memory and fear, making decades-old injuries feel like they literally happened this morning. Second, it wears a mask of righteous duty. Third, and this is the truly scary part, it tricks the willing heart into believing that absolute destruction is logically necessary. And finally, it drives leaders like Kalen and the Archon straight to preemptive violence, fully convincing them they have to strike first just to survive.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, The Strategies of the Council of Three Powers. As this massive colossus of ash and violet flame starts to manifest on the battlefield, literally feeding off the armies of Skell and Valen, the Council has to decide how to intervene, and it sparks a really intense debate. On one side, you have Vassago issuing a stark warning about the sheer, unstoppable momentum of armies that are already locked in battle. On the other side, Mar stands in strict defense of absolute personal accountability. The Council quickly realizes that if they just go in swinging and fight fire with fire, they will only be giving the Crimson Tempest exactly what it wants, more violence to feed on.
And Mar brilliantly illustrates this reality. with a concept called the calculus of vengeance. This mathematically maps out the cold logic of a blood feud. Vengeance equals grievance, multiplied by the sum of all past injuries plus all expected future retributions. By laying it out as an actual formula, Ilion proves just how inescapable generational hatred really is once it gets going.
The text drives the math home with this incredible quote. Retribution is a geometric progression that never reaches zero but approaches infinity, turning heroes into the very monsters they oppose. I mean, think of an argument where both people just keep trying to get the last word. It literally never ends. You can never truly balance the scales with wrath. Every single act of preemptive justice just adds to the infinite sum on the other side's ledger. The only way to stop the progression is to refuse to do the math.
Chapter 4, The Mastering of the Fire.
All right, this brings us to the climax of the chronicle. The council makes an incredibly perilous, calculated move. They walk out and stand directly in the path of the oncoming, blood-crazed legions of Skell and Valen. They completely refuse to draw weapons. They don't use their overwhelming physical power. Instead, they appeal entirely to human restraint, forcing the leaders of these twin city-states to pause and look at what they are about to do.
So Commander Kalen and the Archon are forced into taking 3 literal psychological steps to starve the shadow of its power. 1. They have to confront the illusion that the other side is about to betray them. 2. They have to actively assert their own free will, recognizing that their anger has been artificially amplified. And 3. They must mentally and verbally close the ledgers of historical hatred regarding the Valley of Red Stones. Actually, scratch that. They don't just have to close them. They have to actively choose to stop the geometric progression dead in its tracks.
Because the Crimson Tempest is entirely a psychological manifestation, the second those two leaders refuse to engage in righteous destruction, the shadow has absolutely nothing left to burn. Deprived of its fuel, this towering colossus simply dissolves into harmless gray ash right there on the battlefield. The absolute key takeaway here is this. True mastery of the fire doesn't mean you just stop caring about injustice. It means using the raw energy of that unfairness to build resilience and forge peace rather than burning the whole world down.
Finally, Chapter 5, The Watcher in the Gray Wastes.
Our explainer wraps up as the narrative camera dramatically pulls back. We pan away from the cooling eastern frontier, traveling far beyond the mountains until we reach this featureless, silent landscape. Here, out in the silent gray wastes, we get the cosmic perspective. We see the multifaceted eyes of Belial sitting upon a throne of cold ash. He is watching the fourth shadow drift back into the void, entirely defeated by human free will. But he watches with this absolute chilling detachment. There is no anger at all, only a terrifying, calculated patience.
And the text leaves us with Belial's dark, lingering realization. They have mastered the fire today, but the 3 shadows that remain are patient. Let us see how they fare when the shadow does not burn, but freezes. It is such a profound, haunting cliffhanger to end on. Humanity conquered the explosive, burning temptation of wrath for now. But what exactly happens to the human heart when the next temptation isn't hot, loud and violent, but cold, silent, and totally paralyzing? Well, that is a question we are definitely going to have to explore next time. Keep analyzing the lore, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.